See how it turned green? Now it's actually taking it. Well, Pastor's voice comes all the way into the orange. Red is danger. So I keep it up here. So that's how it goes across. How you receive it, I have no idea.
Yeah, it's just barely, my volume, I just had problems.
Questions, concerns, comments? Success. You have a question?
Past few week or so, I saw this like the Ghost Hunter
Mhm.
TV show,
Mhm.
and they were like trying to summon the spirit of what they thought was the dead person that died in that house.
In that place, uh-huh.
So, and then they were calling it by name because they did it with a Ouija board.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I'm wondering, would the human soul be actually stuck in a place like that?
No.
Or would that be the actual demon?
That would be the demon, yeah. That would be the demon. We know from the Bible that immediately at death, the human soul goes either to heaven or hell. Immediately. No in between, no purgatory, no limbo, none of that. Goes immediately heaven or hell. Although some theologians believe there is and again, we're talking about where God is, there's no time. And so, does time actually pass? Not really. But some theologians will say, well, there is a kind of a meeting, if you will, where you meet God and God sends you to heaven or hell. Okay, so that if you want to call that an intermediate step, I don't know that that's really appropriate. But in any case, almost immediately, I guess we could say heaven or hell. So no, they're not stuck on earth. Nowhere. They're not stuck on earth nowhere. They're not floating in space. They're not in clouds. They're not in plants. They're not in rocks. They're not. They're in heaven or hell, period. So the only spirits that we deal with are angels, good and bad. Good angels and bad angels. And of course, God and the devil. They're all spirits. Okay, God is a spirit. Devil is a spirit. Angels are spirits. So those are the only spirits that we can deal with here on earth. And the good angels, of course, are there for our protection and support, help, and of course, so is God. And the evil angels are there to tempt us and to lead us to sin and to cause us guilt and terrorize us in any way that God may allow for a particular moment. The answer to that question is pretty simple. No, they're not spirits. Now, it's also possible, certainly, for all of the angels. There's a theological debate, I guess, as to whether all of the angels have names. Some theologians believe they do, that all the angels have names. All the myriads, thousands, hundreds, thousands, millions of them, how many ever have names, individual names. I don't know, you can't prove that from the Bible. Of course, we do know that there are the archangels that have names. There's Gabriel and maybe Michael. There's a little question on that one sometimes, whether or not he's the angel of the Lord, pre-incarnate Christ, or whether he's an archangel. Those are the only ones named in the Bible. In the Apocrypha, there are a couple others named, Raphael, and forget the other one, there's one more. Ariel, I think it's, I'm not sure. But anyway, there's two more named in the Apocrypha, but we don't know, of course, those accurate or not. Do the rest of them have names? I don't know. Could it be that God allows Satan to reveal those names to certain individuals so that they can call upon them to do their evil bidding? That's possible. So if they call somebody by name. Also, if you call out a person who is dead, who's already their soul is already in heaven and hell, the demon certainly can answer for that person or pretend to be that person. Let's put it that way. Okay? We know this because a demon took on the visage and the name of Saul or Samuel and appeared to Saul. Okay, now, was it really Samuel? I don't believe so. Most Bible scholars don't believe so. There are a few that say it was Samuel. I don't think so. God is not going to allow that to drag Samuel out of heaven and make him appear to Saul. Now, the things that the supposed Samuel said to Saul turned out to be true, but that's, again, God can do that. You look at Balaam. Balaam was not a believer, and Balaam God caused Balaam to say true things, even though he was an unbeliever. So God can certainly do that. That's no problem. So could it be that somebody would call out a deceased person's name, and that person or a demon in the guise of that person would answer? Sure, that's very possible, very likely. Okay. Anything else? Another question? Comment? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say yesterday's celebration was just amazing. I watched it from beginning to end.
Oh, well, good.
That
Good.
was amazing.
Very unusual, extremely unusual for our country. The only time that we normally do parades like that is at during a war or at the end of a war. So very, 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 very unusual. And there's no particular reason why. I think it has to do, it goes all the way back to the time of Washington, President Washington, the first president, and him not really wanting to have a standing army. I think that's what it goes back to. And so the whole idea of an army that is, for a lack of a better thing, just there rather than being called up as it happened in the Revolutionary War, and wars really from there till really the First World War. First World War, of course, they had a draft during the war between the states, but it wasn't very successful, and there's a lot of argument whether it was even needed. But yeah, I think that's what it goes back to. There's no rule anywhere written. There's certainly nothing in the Constitution or anywhere else that would say that such parades and such are bad or illegal or wrong or anything like that. It's just that we just don't do them. And Trump is right. Why does everybody else do them? Because they don't have that tradition of not having starting out not having a standing army. They don't have that tradition. Right.
They were just killing with muskets. Take this gun, point in that direction. Nowadays, we're going to have technology
Yeah.
communication.
Well, but the thing is, the British, marched with lances. I mean, they did this. They've trooped the colors, for more than 1,000 years. The French, have done the same. The Belgians, the Germans, the Italians, the Swiss, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Greeks, the Turks. Everybody's done this for 1,000 years. And every, the king's birthday or queen's birthday or, whatever, they bring out all the, all the big guns and the whole things and march up and down the street. Everybody does it.
This
And,
one's different, though.
huh?
This one's a little different because it's not a show of force; it's a history. It was a
Yeah,
history.
right. And I think that's important to remember too. But it is, as I say, it was rather a very unusual thing to happen in our nation anyway. Anything else, real quick? Nobody? Yeah.
I'm going to say mine. I just thought of their comment about the fact that we could not become a nation until we won our freedom.
Right. Well, that's obviously
Military,
that's
and then always being ready.
that's obviously that's obviously If you don't win, you don't get to call your shots, so to speak. Yeah, exactly.
That is very important. And
Yeah,
also,
yeah.
just prior to that, I was being quite concerned the fact that our past president really let our military down. The military didn't want anything to do with him, in my opinion. They weren't signing up, all this other stuff.
That is kind of amazing that recruitment all of a sudden just turned around. That well, I don't. Yeah, but I don't think that's it. I really don't. I think it's a mental. I think it was a mental assumption or opinion or whatever more than anything else. It wasn't actually anything real. Not that I found anyway. Not that when I talked to people from the post in the service for a long time. They didn't say anything one way or another about, well, yeah, we haven't been paid recently, or our food has gotten bad, or we don't have Jeeps anymore, or whatever. They didn't say anything like that. It was a perception. Yeah, it was a perception. The perception was different, and it's amazing that it turned around based just on that perception. That is, to me, that's kind of so. Cause what do you call them? The bonuses, whatever, they didn't change. Right? I mean, you sign up, you get a bonus, right? And if you have a certain skill or a certain set of talents or whatever, you get a bigger bonus or whatever. I mean, the pay didn't change. The pay, like I said, the food didn't change, the pay didn't change, the uniforms didn't change, the vehicles didn't change. Oh yeah.
Because every year, we're building the budget. It's supposed to be a pay raise for the military.
Oh,
Under Biden, it was always bare minimum. It's a bare minimum that they're allowed to do.
Oh, you got a raise, but it wasn't much. In other words.
It was like a couple bucks.
And to make it worse, the economy skyrocketed.
Well, yeah.
There was no adaptation for
Yeah.
the economy.
Oh, there was no
so-
inflation
No.
adjustment? Really? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, yeah.
So everybody in the military really hurt financially.
Oh,
because
okay.
There was no adjustment to that.
No adjustment to that.
Whereas some companies did.
I just assumed that if they did
Military did.
Social Security inflation adjustments, they did the same thing in the military.
No,
No?
that's what that annual pay increase is
Oh,
supposed to be.
supposed to
but
be.
they don't
Ah,
do
I
it.
see. Okay. Well, that explains it then. I get the pay got better.
And also, 2 months after he took office, he pulled out of Afghanistan,
Yeah,
and all the military
Yeah.
said, don't do that.
yeah, yeah,
And then 13 soldiers were
yeah,
killed.
yeah.
So the perception, I think, is.
Yeah, again, perception, yeah. The perception was like, hey, guy's not listening to us. All right. I got this question the other day. I thought it was an interesting question. I'm going to talk about it just for a minute. There is a section of Isaiah that's quoted by Jesus later on in his ministry, and he talks about a bruised reed, or a reed that's been hit or bent, and a flickering or a dim wick, or a wick that's about to go out. And there's some question about what that is. And I found it fascinating that most of the commentaries, not the written ones that I have that go back, 100 years, some of them, but the online commentaries, the modern commentaries, okay? The modern commentaries said, well, the bruised reed and the dim wick, that's poor people. And that's people who are down and out, or people that have disabilities, or people that are weak, or people that don't have any power, the lowest rung of society, and so on and so forth. And that is possible. But when you look at the way that those terms are used in the rest of the Bible, for example, in the Sermon on the Mountain, Jesus talks about the poor, okay, and the disprivileged, as we might call them. Okay, what is he talking about? He is not talking about the materially poor. He's not talking about the worldly poor. Okay, he's talking about the poor in spirit. Poor in spirit means humble. Okay, humble. All right, that's what he's talking about. And the rest of the scriptures, when they talk about these kinds of things, they're talking about a spiritual quality, not material quality, not a worldly quality. They're not talking about people who are poor in the sense of their money, or hurt in the sense of their bodies. They're talking about people who are hurt in their souls, hurt in their spirits. They're talking about people who are very humble in their spirits, or they're talking about people with very, very weak faith, okay? So that's really what Jesus certainly meant when he was talking, and I think also when the Isaiah, or when God is talking about the Messiah, what kind of person is he going to be? Okay, he's going to be a person who does not make life more difficult, or make faith more difficult for these kinds of people. Okay, these kinds of people who are weak in faith or troubled in faith. Okay, weak or troubled or hurt or down in their faith and all that kind of stuff. I take this is one of my personal passages. Whenever I do an installation or an ordination, where there's a young man or a new pastor for a place, and I go with the other pastors and we lay on hands, and every pastor always has a verse that he says. I always use this verse from Isaiah 42. Okay, I think it is very important that all pastors understand that there are going to be people in your congregation or people that you deal with who are going to be weak. They're going to have problems, spiritual problems. Not everybody's going to understand everything spiritually. Not everybody is going to be top-notch theologian. Not everybody in your congregation or everybody that you deal with, that you're teaching, for example, bringing into the faith, for example, doing adult instruction or whatever, not everyone is going to be brilliant. Not everyone is going to understand the Book of Concord. Not everyone's going to understand every passage of Scripture. They're not going, and we shouldn't assume that, and we shouldn't insist on that. We should take people, as the saying goes, where they are in their spirituality. Now, of course, we want to build them up. Of course, we want them to improve their spirituality, but we don't snuff it out. Okay? I see way too much of this snuffing out by my brother pastors. Way too much of this snuffing out. Okay? Somebody's got a question or somebody has a hard time with a particular doctrine or whatever. I hear way too many stories, especially people coming through here. Okay? You know, our congregation has changed 90% since I've gotten here. Okay, we have a lot of new people that have come through here. Some are only here for a year or two, some less even. And I hear it over and over and over and over again. Either they stopped going back where they lived originally because some pastor, you know, came down on them and said, no, you know, what are you, stupid? What are you, foolish? Don't you understand? You know, and just snuffed them right out, you know, or just busted them. They're already bruised, already bent, and, you know, just snapped them, okay? Because, well, you're not up to my standards. You're not up to, you know, seminary standards or whatever, okay? And I say this knowing how that works because I was that way the first 5 or 6 years in the ministry. I was, as I said, I was a good Pharisee, okay? I was a very good Pharisee. Every graduate that comes out of our seminary, every single one of them, without fail, every single one of them that comes out is a Pharisee when they come out. They take over a congregation, they are a Pharisee, right? Immediately. And they rule by the law. And it takes years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years more for them to learn. And hopefully they have an older pastor nearby who can guide them in this, and they take a long time to learn to rule by the gospel rather than by the law. And that's what I think this passage is all about. Okay? Let the gospel predominate. Let the gospel always, always, always predominate. We have lost so many people in our church, and I mean our denomination. We have lost so many people because of legalism. And it's just unfortunate. It really is sad. And sometimes we get them back and sometimes we don't. I've had people here come to church here for the first time after I've been here like 20 years. And I asked them, I said, well, were you always here? Well, yeah. You know, I've lived here for 15 years, 20 years. Well, why have you been so long? Well, because I got shut down, you know, back in Michigan or back in Minnesota or whatever, or Iowa or whatever like that. I got shot down. Or, you know, one great story, just one example I'll give you that's hilarious. I had a lady show up here. This was years ago. She's long gone now. But she showed up and I asked her, I said, well, when's the last time you were in church? She said, about 5 years ago. And I've lived here about 4 years. I said, well, gee, what took you 4 years? You know, and she said, well, I was kind of bitter. I was kind of upset. I said, why is that? And he says, well, at my wedding, and this happened to be in Minnesota, at my wedding, and this was quite a while ago, she was a middle-aged lady by now. Anyway, she was at my wedding, they wouldn't allow my sister's husband, who was really good friends with the groom, to be in the wedding. Why? Because he was Roman Catholic. And I said, well, what was he supposed to do in the wedding? He said, no, he was just a groomsman. And I said, you're kidding. He said, oh, no, the pastor was very adamant. There would not be anybody, if anybody was going to stand up there and be a part of the wedding party, they had to be Wisconsin Synod. And I said, really? I said, yeah. And the pastor, to explain it, the pastor was, in that days, back in those days, he was in his 60s, been around quite a long time, and that was his policy. And it really upset the people in the family. Now, should it have upset the people? No, of course not. Should it have kept this woman out of church for years and years and years? Of course not. I'm not approving of that. But that's just one example of how, you've got this guy, and he was non-practicing Catholic. She said, well, he never went, but he hadn't, officially changed. And well, the pastor said, sorry, you can't stand up, you can't be a groomsman. And that ruined this woman's experience with her church for many, many years. And that's what I'm talking about, that kind of stuff. And it still happens today, not quite like that, but it still happens today. I can tell you a million stories like that. Go ahead.
I think that this whole topic also isn't only just on the pastor, but it's also on the congregation. Because the congregation needs to support those who are struggling.
Yeah.
And if they start talking about people,
Yeah.
It could
Yeah.
deter people
Right.
from building that
Right.
relationship.
Right.
And I've seen
Right.
that happen.
Oh, yeah, I have too. I have seen cases in my congregation, but other congregations too, where let's say we have a divorce situation coming on, okay? And, I know the details, but the people don't. All the people know is, oh, she got divorced. Well, what's the matter with her? And kind of ostracize her a little bit, or space, distance themselves. Totally wrong. She was the one who was hurt. It was her husband that had an affair, and whatever. But people didn't know that, and she didn't want the people to know that. And I couldn't tell the people that. I couldn't announce. Well, she's the one being hurt here. Not, she's not the one doing the divorce. I couldn't do that. Because of the sanctity of the confessional and all that. But at the same time, the people just assumed, oh, she's a loose woman or whatever, and distance themselves from her. And that's, you're right. That it applies, yes, it applies to pastors, but yeah, it applies to the whole congregation. And in some cases, I think the leadership of the congregation needs to stand up and confront the pastor too, and say to the pastor, cut this out. This is not right. And what you're doing is you're cutting off people for no reason, and we're not going to stand for this. So yeah, it's always better to err on the side of the gospel. And I could be wrong. Some of the things I allow, okay, I could be wrong, and I could be doing it, not 100% kosher, but I always lean towards the gospel and not the law. And because, in the long run, what am I judged on? I'm not judged on the law. I'm judged on the gospel. And did the gospel predominate in my ministry? And I like to think it does. Okay, we have new papers. Start a whole new chapter. Actually, 2 chapters, because they're kind of short. And they deal with things that are not going to require, I think, a lot of discussion or debate or anything. So we're going to take 2 chapters at a time here.
Wonder, I had the kids last week, that's why.
Did you have something on 34 you wanted to ask, Laura? Okay. That's because you were not with us. Yes, right. All right. So, chapters 35 and 36 we're going to take together. And this is going to be, again, some repetition that we're going to have to deal with, okay? So don't let that bother you. You're going to hear some things over again that you've already heard. And we're going to also have lists of stuff that that are going to be repeats of lists we've already had. Okay, again, as I warned you about Exodus and really numerous of the books of the Old Testament, and especially the first 5, repetition is something that is endemic and part of their content. So, let's read through at least the first few verses of chapter 35. Moses assembled all the congregation of the sons of Israel and said to them, "These are the things that the Lord has commanded you to do. For 6 days' work may be done, but on the seventh day you shall have a holy day, a Sabbath of complete rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall not kindle a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath." And then Moses spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, "This is the thing which the Lord has commanded, saying, Take from among you a contribution to the Lord. Whoever is a willing heart, let him bring it as the Lord's contribution, gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet material, fine linen, goat's hair, ram's skin, dyed red, porpoise skins, and acacia wood, and oil for lighting, and spices for the anointing oil, and for the fragrant incense, onyx stones, and setting stones for the ephod, and for the breast piece." Okay, we'll stop there for now. So we got two things put together here. One is voluntary, one is not voluntary. The not voluntary is obeying the Sabbath and not working on the Sabbath. The voluntary is bring contributions to put together all of the things that we have had described up till now. Okay, the building hasn't actually started. The building will start soon. We have that in the following chapters. But up to now, it's just been described, and now God says, okay, now you know what we need in order to fill out the tabernacle and everything. Now you need to start bringing that in. Yes?
Shopping, working,
Is what?
shopping.
Shopping.
Like on Sundays, I'll go to Walmart after.
Oh,
And I often thought, well, is this considered work?
shopping, good. You know, you'd have to check with your with your Jewish friends. I don't know. I don't.
Because, you know, the Sabbath is Sabbath.
Oh yeah, I know. But is shopping working? You know, they wouldn't have anything like shopping, I don't think, in the Old Testament. At least not in the days of Moses. Certainly, nobody had shops. I mean, how could you have shops? How could you have working places like this when you're on the move for 40 years?
It would be like gathering.
Huh?
It would be like gathering. So you're going shopping, it would be like gathering supplies. So if they consider
Okay.
gathering
Yeah.
work,
Yeah, they did consider, going out to collect the manna, right?
Yeah.
Or going out to collect the dove, the quail. That was considered work. You're right. So yeah, I guess if that's the case, then yeah, you would have to say shopping would be work. Yeah. No more. Let's look at the notes.
Supposed to allow your servants to work either.
Right. No, that's very true. Yeah. Yeah, you couldn't send anybody, "Oh, go do this, go pick this up for me." Yeah, that would also be wrong, right?
In the store,
Right, yes, right. Or people you employ, right, you couldn't do that. Number one, to us as impatient modern people, a long inventory given in this appeal for volunteers seems redundant and unnecessary. We would have condensed this section down to a few sentences and perhaps eliminated the verses 11 to 19, which you'll see that in a moment. It is a challenge to say something new and fresh about the articles mentioned here. Most commentators say very little, if anything, about the entire chapter. You look online at an online commentary or get a book out, a commentary on Exodus, there's a couple sentences about chapter 35, and that's about it. It is true that the things mentioned here have already been spoken of in chapters 25 through 31, but if we take a few minutes to look at exactly what it takes to serve the Lord and to take proper care of all that was consecrated to Him as a wave offering, we will gain a blessing. So there is something to be learned yet here also. All the items mentioned in this chapter are things that come from hearts that were moved and willing to give to the Lord. As such, these verses speak to all believers of all time. So especially those last verses 4 to 9 that I just read, those are verses that I guess we would today describe as talking about stewardship, Christian stewardship. What kind of offerings do you bring to the Lord? Okay, and what's the motivation for that? What's the thinking of that? What's the goals of that? That's the idea, stewardship, Christian stewardship. And that's something that should be ongoing. It used to be when I had to fill out missionary forms, missionary reports. Every month I had to do a missionary report to the mission board. And one of the subjects they always ask about was stewardship and offerings. And they would always ask, okay, when is your next stewardship program? When is your next stewardship Sunday? Or when was your last stewardship Sunday? Or what stewardship program did you last run? You probably remember stewardship Sundays, right? Okay. I never, at least after the first 1 or 2 years, I never did stewardship programs after that. I never did a stewardship Sunday after that. I always did stewardship on an ongoing basis during the year. And of course, at a time like at the voters meeting, we're approving a budget for the next year. You talk more about stewardship then than you do other times. That's normal. But I made sure always to put into my sermons and my Bible classes comments about stewardship all through the year. And so I would always fill that out. I always say stewardship is an ongoing process in this congregation. Okay, that's the way I always put out. And it never fails. At least once or twice a year, I would get a response back from the mission board saying, yeah, but what's the name of your stewardship program that you're running right now? And I would say, the Bible. And they would say, that's not a sufficient answer. I said, what synodical stewardship program are you running? And I said, I don't run synodical stewardship programs. Oh my goodness. And my offering percentage and my offering basis was always way higher than the other congregations around, always. And it still is to this day. Even when we have kind of an off Sunday here, compared to the churches in Tucson, which are very rich churches, by the way. And they really are. I mean, I don't think people really realize the number of very well-off people there are in Tucson and in those churches. We're talking, multi-millionaire people, big time. And their offerings on a particular Sunday can be, way through the roof. But of course, they also have 300 or 400 members. Okay, and what we've got less than 100. 60, 70 at the very most local active people that are here at least once a month for church. And so, the actual percentage is actually better here, but the actual numbers are not. Anyway, so that's what we're talking about. Number 4, the chapter sets out by reminding people the Sabbath command. Again, this is repetition. This in itself should strike us as somewhat odd, since God had already spoken to Moses about 4 other feasts outside or beside the Sabbath. Obviously, Moses must have said more to the Israelites than is recorded here. It is true that the Sabbath is the original feast, the only one that existed before sin came into God's creation and spoiled it. All the other feasts celebrate redemption, resurrection, consummation, and pilgrimage, events that would not have occurred if sin had not come. So there is kind of a special reverence and a special insistence by God, a special emphasis by God on the Sabbath because it goes back before the fall into sin. And this whole idea of rest in the Lord, and again, Sabbath does not mean seventh. Does not mean seventh day. It means rest. Does not mean 7. Okay? How hard that is for some to understand, but boy, you just got to beat it right into their heads. Sabbath means rest, okay? Okay, so the whole idea of rest with God, okay, has to do with not so much a day of the week and really not so much even work in a essential sense, all right? Because even on the Sabbath, you could say work was still done, right? People didn't lay in bed for 24 hours. They didn't, right? God didn't command that. So they had to get up, wash their face, brush their teeth, comb their hair, put their clothes on. Is that work? Sure, it's work, especially you get older. That's a lot of work, okay? So the rest is a spiritual rest, folks. Yes, God insisted on a physical rest, but that was to promote the spiritual rest, all right? it's a lot easier if all you have to do is get up and put your clothes on, and you don't have you don't have to go to the office, you don't have to go to the factory, whatever, then it's a lot easier for you to take time to read the Bible or whatever, okay? And so, yes, physical rest was a part of it in the Old Testament. This is also why physical rest is not insisted upon in the New Testament. Because again, what God is interested in is time that you take and he doesn't care what day, he doesn't care what hours, he doesn't care, how often or whatever, just that you take some time to appreciate the eternal rest that you have in Christ. The Sabbath supersedes it all. Those who celebrate the Sabbath enter into a rest of God and are in communion with Him. As God's creatures, we are part of God's original Sabbath. And as His redeemed, we will enter into the final and ultimate Sabbath. I think we need to understand that in the New Testament era, after the completion of the work by the Messiah, by Christ, we are in a perpetual state of rest with God. That is ongoing. That is not limited to a day of the week. That's not limited to Sunday any more than it was limited to Saturday. It's not limited to any day of the week. It's not limited to any minute or hour of the week. We are in a perpetual state of rest with Christ. Okay? Perpetual. Whether we're working, whether we're not, whether we're sitting at home doing nothing, whether we're, whatever we're doing, we are at rest with God. We are in His companionship. We are in fellowship with Him constantly. That is never broken. Okay? Once we are brought to faith by the Holy Spirit through the means of grace, we are never separated from God. Okay? The only thing is our bodies are separated for a while we're still living in this world. But our souls are not separated from God. Not now and not in eternity. Okay? So as soon as we become a member of the Holy Christian Church through faith, okay, by conversion through the Holy Spirit, as soon as that happens, we are in perpetual and eternal fellowship with God. That needs to be remembered. So even back in the days when people had no weekends, I mean, think about it. Weekends, 1923, Henry Ford originated the 40-hour work week. 1923. Just a little over 100 years ago. Before that, there was no 40-hour work week. If you worked before 1923, you probably worked 7 days a week. And you probably worked 8 to 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you wanted to go to church on Sunday, you had to go to church at 6 o'clock in the morning in order to get to your factory or whatever by, let's say, 7 or 8, right? My mother-in-law talked about it, about going to church at 6 o'clock in the morning in Philadelphia, okay, and then the women heading home and the men going off to the factories, and some of the women going to sewing factories or whatever too, that also. But the people all went to, and the churches were packed. When you did not get a day off, when you did not get Sunday off to go to church, when you had to be at the factory or you had to be at the, whatever place to work, the churches were packed. They were packed to the rafters. All the aisles were full. Okay? And that was true in America, that was true in England, that was true in Europe, that was true all around the Christian world. Long before Henry Ford and a 40-hour work week and having Saturday and Sundays off. So it's kind of amazing when you stop and think about it now. We have all this time on our hands, and we have all these things that make our lives so much easier and give us a lot of leisure time, and yet I still hear from people, I don't have time to go to church on Sunday. I can't make it by 10:30 in the morning. You mean I have to get up at like 9 o'clock? Well, I said, what time do you have to be at work? 8 o'clock? What time do you get up? 6 or 6:30? Well, why can't you get up on Sundays at 6 or 6:30? Well, I want to sleep in. Okay. How long do you want to sleep in? Well, I want to sleep in till 11. Well, you need to sleep in till 11? Come on, I mean, yeah. It's just amazing to me. If people would just go back in time 100 years, they would see the dedication and the faithfulness people had to church, it would blow them away. It really would. It's really kind of amazing.
But don't you think that's society's fault? Because now we have computers, we have tablets, we have TV, we have football games.
Oh, well, yeah.
They work about 5 days.
Well, not only that, but I mean, what's closed on Sunday anymore? There's only huh?
Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A.
The one place I want to eat on
Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby, Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby, but and one thing that's written in law, what is written? Car dealerships. That's written in law. Car dealerships. But the law is funny in Arizona anyway. I don't know about other states, but in Arizona, the law is kind of interesting. The law does not say you can't have your car dealership open on Sunday. It doesn't say that. But what the law says is you can't stay open 7 days a week. And so most car dealers, the vast majority of them, close on Sunday, but they're open on Saturday. There's a few, every once in a while, there'll be a special sale and they'll be open Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and it'll be closed on Monday. They have to close 1 out of 7 days, but it's not required that it be on Sunday, but most of them pick Sunday. And of course, in some states, of course, you can't sell booze on Sundays. No liquor on Sundays. I remember in Texas it was that way when I first moved there, when I went to Texas, and you'd go into the Safeway or whatever, and the liquor department would be gated off, and you couldn't go in there. And then they changed it a few years after we moved there to you could only buy liquor after noon. Okay, so then they opened it at noon, and then a few years after that they said, never mind. It's like in Texas, you used to be able to drive around with open container. There was no open container law in Texas. And many's the time, I remember, because I did a lot of traveling in the outskirts, I have members all over the place, and many a time I can remember getting behind a guy in a pickup truck, in the rural parts of Texas, and he would be cruising down the road with a brewski in his hand, and a cigarette in one hand, driving with cigarette in one hand and a beer in the other hand, And in Arizona, of course, we had drive-through liquor stores, and we had no container law too for a long time here in Arizona. And so all along Highway 80 in Yuma, there was one after another of drive-in liquor stores. And you would drive in, get your booze, pop your top, and just drive out again. It was kind of wild. It's amazing more people didn't die. Yeah.
Because I'm looking through Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
And it does say that Chick-fil-A shall stay open.
Number 6. No doubt seem overly harsh to us today that breaking of the Sabbath would be a crime deserving capital punishment. However, seen in the light of the true meaning of the Sabbath, we need to understand that those who do not celebrate life with God are already dead. The punishment of death comes only to the dead. Okay? So this is kind of a concept that God has, again, in the Old Testament more than anywhere else. But in the Old Testament, this idea, if you are separated from God by unbelief, okay, you do not participate in the fellowship with God, then you are considered by God and by the law, the Mosaic law, to be dead. And so putting you to physical death is not a big deal, really. It's not considered to be overly harsh. It's not considered to be above and beyond the pale. Okay. What does these verses really tell us? The first 4 verses, anyway, first 3 verses. What does this tell us, believers today, about taking time to worship the Lord?
How important it is.
Yes. And who is it important to? To God, yeah. First and foremost, it's important to God. Whether it's important to you or not really is of secondary importance. It's important to God. This is something God wants. This is part of God's will. I had a member, if you want to call him that. Actually, his wife and kids were members, but I only saw him in church once or twice a year at that sometimes. And he had this really big deal. He had this really big problem about being, as he called it, forced to go to church. And his big thing was, I do not need to go to church to be saved. Okay? I do not need to obey that commandment in order to go to heaven. Okay? And I would always tell him, technically, yeah, that's true. Okay? That you're not saved by keeping the law. Very good. Okay. But, all right, what does this tell you? What does this tell God, really, about your attitude toward his word? I read the Bible all the time. And I have to say, yes, he was very theologically astute. Okay? He was a guy who he knew his doctrine. He read the Bible. He read the Book of Concord. He knew his theology. He was very, I would call him good Lutheran as far as his doctrine was concerned and all that. He was very knowledgeable in those areas. He just did not like sitting in church. And, you know, he would say, yeah, your sermons are okay, but they're still sermons. Okay? And I would say, what do you mean? He said, you know, I would probably come more often. He told me this once. He said, I would probably come more often if we had like 2 hymns, Bible reading, a prayer, and okay, yeah, collect the offering if you want to. I would come all the time. If your service was half an hour long, okay, and just had those essential items, I would probably be there every week. But I just can't stand sitting there doing nothing while somebody talks at me. That drives me insane. And some of the songs are crazy. Right? And I would say, well, don't you like to come to communion? He says, frankly, I can take it or leave it. It's not a big deal to me. So yeah, you can leave that out too, as far as I'm concerned. That was his attitude. You know, it's just too long, it's too boring, and it doesn't matter how good a preacher you are or aren't. Doesn't matter. Just not gonna go. And I finally released him after 10 years or so. I finally said, I'm going to take you off the books. But his wife and kids, they still came regularly. So,
Sir?
Yeah.
During my drug induced days, I never went to church.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And many times I thought, every time I needed him, I would always pray, and he always came to my help. I mean, not necessarily giving me the answer I wanted to hear,
Right.
but he was there to help me.
Right.
And finally I decided I need to go to his house
Yeah.
every now and then, because I'm always asking him to come to my house. So I started going to church. Ever since then, I try not to miss a Sunday, or I just do it online, because when you're done, I feel like I've been cleansed.
Sure. Oh, good. Good. That's a good thing. So yeah, take time. Take time. And that's really the bottom line. Top of the next page, we're going to look at the next verses that we read already. Number 7, the prohibition to even light a fire on the Sabbath has been interpreted in various ways by different Jews down through the centuries. Most Orthodox Jews do not cook any food on the Sabbath, but interestingly enough, they will light candles. Talk about picky, right? Why is it okay to light candles, but it's not okay to light the stove? Well, yeah, but why doesn't the light of the stove represent the light of God? Light is light. Fire is fire. Okay, all right. I still say it's picky, but anyway. Number 8, the offering that's detailed in 5-9 is preceded by the statement that it is a command of the Lord, and at the same time, it is a free will offering. This certainly sounds contradictory to us, and yet all that God would have us do to keep and follow his will are both commands and something we willingly do as his children. We keep his commands both because he orders us to do so and because we love him who first loved us. So we shouldn't think that when we hear this, this is the Lord's command saying, take from you so and so and so, whoever is of a willing heart. So I command you to have a willing heart. Okay. All right. Yeah, it sounds like God is asking us to do contrary things here. It's not. God is recognizing that if we are believers, we will desire to return to Him a portion of what He has blessed us with. Now, of course, you've got churches today that insist on a tithe. And we haven't talked about tithe yet. It hasn't come up yet. It will. But this is not something that goes on in the New Testament either. Okay? One of those regulations, again, that in the Old Testament was a law. You had to bring a tenth. Okay? You do not have to bring a tenth in the New Testament. Okay? And I would say it's good for the church that that is true. Because I know personally of numerous people over the years of my ministry and various other congregations, I know there are people who give much more than 10%. Now, it's true, they kind of make up for those who give nothing or give very much lower than 10%, so it kind of works out. But if we didn't have those people who gave much more than 10%, if they just stuck to them, if I just laid down a law and I said, okay, it's got to be 10% across the board, all right, we'd probably be in trouble, because there again, we would have people that would just say, nah, never mind. And of course, in our system, okay, nobody knows except the person and God and the financial secretary. And me, I know too, but I only know so that if I see a huge change, I know there's something going on with the person. Okay, understand? Now, I'm not judging somebody's faith. If I see somebody who's given $100 a week and all of a sudden it's $20 a week, then I'll probably take them aside and say, hey, is everything okay? You know, would you lose your job, or you know what's going on? You got a medical bill that you can't pay, whatever. Okay, and that's just me wanting to know. You know, is there something I can help with? Is something we can pray about? Whatever. You know, that's the only reason I watch stuff like that. But I don't watch it real close. Of course, in the good old Lutheran Church in the United States, one of the things that used to plague us back in the days was you would go into a church very often, and one of the things you would see somewhere in the narthex, somewhere in the opening entrance of the church, and you would see a long list. And there would be the names of the members and the contributions they gave last year, for example. Okay? Oh, yeah. And I had a congregation, I went to a congregation in my college days in Mankato, Minnesota, where the pastor insisted on doing that. And that was the first thing you saw when you walked in. That was the first thing you saw. And it wasn't in fine print either. He had names printed that big. And then a dot, 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 and then, Joe Smith, $10,000 for the year, and down. And then, of course, at the bottom, he had the names in red, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I went to voters' meetings and when I was there, and I tried to talk the pastor out of it, and he would always insist, you're out of order, Mr. Spencer. When you get to be a pastor, you're going to find, you're going to need this, whatever. He was something else. He was a character. His son became district president, and anyway, yeah.
I think this also is one of those things where people always think of offerings as it has to be money, but the thing is like when you donate stuff to the church or when you offer your time and your services.
Oh yeah, sure.
For the church, that's considered an offering too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So even those who may not financially be able to afford to give a bunch of money still offer. It just looks different.
Yeah. Well, and two, in certain places, money is hard to come by. I had a very good, dear old friend who was a pastor, a Missouri Synod pastor, back in the 20s and 30s, and during the Depression. And he pastored in West Virginia, which, number one, didn't have a whole lot of Lutherans. And number two, they were in bad shape. And he told me, he said, for about 10 years, all he did ever get paid was chickens and potatoes. People bring a sack of potatoes or, a couple heads of cabbage, or a couple of chickens. And that's how he got paid. And for that was for a long, long time. And that was true of a lot of people. So yeah, it's not always money. That's right. And true too, we've got some people over the years, I've had people in my congregations that have been very good at certain tasks and abilities, and they couldn't give much. But I always remember a church where I was confirmed at, Missouri Synod Church in Yuma, and we had a family called the Klumkers. And the Klumkers were, they ran a honey wagon. You all know what a honey wagon is, okay? That is, it pumps out cesspools, all right, and and so the whole, and Mr. Klumker and Mrs. Klumker, and they're rich by any standard, but he had 2 trucks, and he and his brother ran the trucks, and they had, I think, the Klumkers that were members of our church anyway, I think they had 6 kids, yeah, all boys, 6 boys, and I can never forget, every Sunday they would come in, they were there every Sunday, and every Sunday they would come in, and they would sit down, and then there would be empty chairs all around them because they smelled, wow. I know they couldn't help it, but they did. And they weren't ever, they weren't probably givers, but I know a church out there was in the country when it first was built, and so I would notice the truck was there, the honey wagon was there at least once a month. And I asked the pastor one time, I said, how much does they charge you for that? He said, oh, he doesn't charge at all. He says he does that as his offering to the church. So that's an interesting offering. That's an interesting. Question, is Christian stewardship optional for believers today?
Well, I think stewardship can be different.
Okay.
Like when I talk to people, I always try to bring up something about God,
Uh-huh.
about their faith and stuff like that. So
That's your offering, huh?
Well, no, it's not my offering. It's like that's what I feel is a good part, is that he came to me and helped me.
Sure.
So I want other people to know that he is there.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I know sometimes it's in the wrong situations, but the words are, well, you know me, I have no filter. So the words are out before
Right. And that is good stewardship. I mean, evangelism, right, is good stewardship too. I mean, it's got to be done. Is it optional? Yes and no. Is it part of a New Testament law? No. And should it be made a law? No. And I always have objected vehemently to passing out or having people make hard, fast commitments to the church budget. I have never done that, but a lot of my pastor friends, they do it all the time. And I noticed that most of the churches in Phoenix and Tucson do it. And so at a certain time of the year, they have a stewardship Sunday, and on that stewardship Sunday, they have a little form in the bulletin maybe, or they mail it out to people, and you put it on your name, and you fill it out, and what your offering envelope number is or whatever, and you put down for this year, 2026, let's say, I will contribute, $10,000, and you sign it. And then I had a pastor friend who had people, he had a special part in the service. He stopped the service, and he had these people coming up, and they would come all the way up into the altar area, and he had this big basket on the altar, and people would come up there and place their pledges, they were called, put their pledges in this big basket. Now, some pastors would open those, okay, and then, or their treasurer sometimes would open those and then say, okay, and then they would have to come back and say, we didn't get enough pledges to meet the budget. Okay, so it reminds me of a joke. I'm not sure it was a joke. I think it was actually happened, but I remember a joke from a priest. I was good friends with Father Fahey, F-A-H-Y, no E, Squire Danahan. Anyway, so F-A-H-Y, Father Fahey, and he was a good man. But anyway, he told my dad and I one time, he said, the bishop came, and when the bishop comes, you get special offerings. And so the bishop came, and he stood there, and he passed out the baskets, and the elders, went around and collected baskets, and the basket came back, and that was for the, charity fund or whatever. And then he passed it around, that was for that was for the local congregation support, whatever. And then the third basket was for the bishop's fund, for his fund. He was going to take it back with him back to Tucson. So the baskets came around, and the guys brought the baskets up, and he got the baskets, and he went like this. Try again. I don't know if it was a apocryphal story or not, but knowing Father Fahey, it might have been. But anyway, the whole thing is that what happens when you do pledges and all that is you really cut people off on one hand who could give much more during their year and might say, well, I don't need to because that was not my pledge. And also, you're really interfering with God and his plans for people. Somebody could put down, yeah, we're going to give 10,000, and then God sees to it that he loses his job in March. And so now you've got this guy on his conscience and on his heart, and he's signed that, and he said, yeah, that's my pledge, and they have lots of words on those pledges, unto God and whatever. I also noticed one more thing. I'll throw this in too. This is interesting. One more thing too. Our church body, or Lutheranism in general, Wisconsin Synod in particular, okay, we're very big on these things. Like I say, most of my pastor friends do this kind of pledging thing, very much, most of them. But I noticed something very interesting, and they talk about it on Stewardship Sunday, and they say, they burden people's consciences. They say, you got to keep your pledge. And very seldom do they put in a comment about God so providing. In other words, they don't put the proviso in there that God is in control, and the guy could die, for goodness sakes. Half their income, the family income, cut in half. Well, there is one piece of paper in our synodical doings that does have that comment, or did have that comment, and that's when you take out a loan. When you take out a loan with the Synod, the loan that paid for this building and this land and that building and the parsonage, okay, with the Church Extension Fund, CEF, all right? When you take out a loan with the CEF, down at the very bottom, right before you sign, as the pastor and the treasurer or whatever, right before you sign, it says, we, the congregation, fill in the name, congregation, Trinity Lutheran Church, will pay $1,500 a month. And it says, God so enabling. Okay? So when we had my congregation in El Paso, we built a church. We built a fellowship hall like this. We built a parsonage. We built the whole night and the land and everything. And so we owed, I don't know, $200,000, $250,000. I don't know, it's a huge amount. Okay? And we were doing fine. We were paying it fine. And then Ford Motor Company decided to close the maquiladoras, the twin plants in Juarez. And many of our members were executives. They lived in America, but they worked in Mexico. Okay? Ford allowed them to live in America and manage the twin plant, the maquiladora, over in Mexico. And Ford closed it because Juarez was getting very, very violent. And a lot of deaths, a lot of murders and everything, drug cartels and whatever. So they moved out. Ford moved away. And they closed the twin plants. We lost we lost 7 of our top 10 givers in the space of about 6 months. And our weekly income and our monthly income offerings was cut in half. That's one of the reasons I had to go teach school, because they couldn't pay me. And so I had to go teach public school for 5 years during that time because they didn't have money coming in. Well, after a few months of not being able to pay our mortgage, I got the mortgage out and I looked at it and I found that clause, God so enabling. And so I wrote to them and I said, God has not enabled us to pay you. And so we're going to put a moratorium on our mortgage until God enables us once again to pay you. Ooh, they were mad. They were very upset. And they sent a big muckety-muck, a guy by the name of Harry Hagedorn, happened to be a friend of mine, He was head of the whole home mission board. And they flew him down to El Paso, and he came to the congregation, and he said to the congregation, "You got to pay what you owe." And I said, "Harry, God has taken away 7 of our top 10 givers, and he's not replaced them yet. And I'm out pounding the pavement, knocking on doors and doing what I can do, but he has not replaced them. Until he does, I'm sorry, we can't pay." And it says right here, what we signed and what you signed, because he signed it too, it says right here, God's so enabling. God is not enabled. Your argument, Harry, is not with me. Your argument is not with Beautiful Savior Lutheran Church. Your argument is with God. So you take it to God. Well, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to tell the board of directors? What am I supposed I said, "I don't care. You tell them whatever you want to tell them." I said, "We're fulfilling our agreement. Our agreement says God's so enabling, he is not enabled." I don't know for a fact, but I bet you that if you looked at the modern CEF loan documents, that phrase is probably missing. All right, we'll close it off here. We'll pick it up at verse, yeah.
In those countries that are, the churches are maintained by the country, the state, do you feel as though that's good?
By the country?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a good idea, no. I really don't.
It seems to be lower there.
It is very much so, yeah. Yeah.
Because I don't think people are involved.
No, I don't think it's good. State-supported churches are not a good stewardship model, no. Let's close. Right. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen. All right.